Greetings, you're listening to Guiding Stars, Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. Guiding Stars is an interactive, soul-centered astrology talk show using the symbolic language of evolutionary astrology to enlighten and empower you on this journey. Here today with Deva Green, we are discussing Jupiter-Mercury Disseminating phase. It's one of the phases within the 8 primary phases that we have. And looking at the zodiac, we will discuss more about that in a moment if you are just new to this series. And before we get started, though, I'd also like to let you know, if you are a new listener, that we have a website available for you to learn more about evolutionary astrology. That website is schoolofelevolutionaryastrology.com. And we'll just mention that again at the end if you're wanting to access more of the DVDs, etc., that we have available there. But I'm very excited to pick up where we left off with Deva as we move through these 8 phases, looking at Mercury and Jupiter, which is all about how we express ourselves, or how we naturally express ourselves, how we think, what we believe. We'll talk about more about what it all means, finding your natural voice. Don't we all want to be able to do that and express ourselves authentically, organically? So I'd like to welcome Deva back to Guiding Stars. Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right. And anything that you would like to add, or you'd like to just share it at the end, let me know. So I know that there are many interpreters of this great work all over this globe. And so I'll let you ask the folks if anybody's interested in participating in that and being a part of it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, there's a call for translators. It's really exciting that there have been various Jeffrey Wolf Green books published in a diversity of languages. And so we're calling for translators who have an interest in learning the work through translating. It's a great opportunity. So if you're interested in learning the work and also helping the school, please email me and we'll go from there.
So I thought that was perfect to start this show with that, because Jupiter is the archetype of how we interpret something, right?
Yes.
So Mercury obviously is about the written word, and we are looking at the disseminating phase. So let's see that slide. We're going to do a little overview, so don't want to confuse somebody if they're just joining us. That first slide with the phases and aspects. All right, this looks like a lot, but it's actually an incredible tool to have when you are trying to find the planetary phases between 2 planets. And this series is about Mercury and Jupiter. But before we get specific, it's important to look at this chart, essentially, or this wheel, no different than you would look at the natural zodiac. So from Aries to Pisces. Now you don't see Aries through Pisces anywhere on this this image right here, but what you do see is this wheel broken into 8 sections instead of 12. 8 primary phases instead of 12. So from 0 to 360, this wheel reflects still the principles of evolution, just like the wheel of the zodiac from Aries to Pisces. And it's important that you remember this so you don't get confused, that all of the archetypes are still in their same places. Aries at that new phase with a little bit of Taurus, because it's 45 degrees instead of 30 now, is exactly where it always is. And the crescent phase would be Taurus and a little bit of Gemini, as we are dividing the circle in bigger sections. So the circle is broken into these 8 primary phases, each separated by 45 degrees. And the cycle of phases and aspects are going to tell you what stage of evolution that your soul is in relative to the 2 planets that you're looking at, as well as how those 2 planets operate archetypically. And that's what I just love about this particular aspect of EA and how we use this within this work, because we are discussing the relationship in your chart between Mercury and Jupiter, but you can take any two planets to find out where you are in this whole evolutionary dance. We could be, your Mars and Venus, your relationship planets could be culminating, finishing in this life, very karmic closing kinds of relationships, while maybe you've got your Jupiter-Mercury in a new phase, and it's going to be operating very differently. So it's a very fun exercise. I really love diving into this when I was really getting into the very beginning period of my studies here with EA, and it helps you to understand the archetypes. It helps you to understand yourself, your own journey. So highly recommend you trying this with all of the planetary pairs that you choose to work with. So to determine the planetary phase between any two planets, we're going to use the Jupiter-Mercury today. You can see this great new learning tool that Linda created. Thank you, Linda. We put Jupiter at the conjunction at Aries. So you take your Jupiter, find your Jupiter, and you count the degrees to Mercury. And in this case, we went all the way around the zodiac to that trine. We call it a disseminating trine here at 240 degrees. If your Jupiter and your Mercury are 240 degrees apart, that's where they're going to land. So you count those degrees. Now, if your Jupiter-Mercury phase is, say, 72 degrees, and we've already done that particular show, you can find that on YouTube under the crescent phase, Finding Your Natural Voice with David Green, crescent phase, if you've missed any prior shows. All right. Now, another really important piece to remember is looking at a conjunction, an opposition, which is the polarity of that, or a square, which is 90 degrees above or below. Because we're dealing with these planetary phases in terms of evolution, we're going to have two different types of conjunctions, two different types of oppositions, and four different types of squares. So if you notice that, hey, my Jupiter-Mercury is in a square in my chart, you have to know or be able to assess what type of square is that. Is it a crescent square, a first quarter square, a disseminating square, or a last quarter square? Right. So this is why the planetary phases can tell you so much more than you would know just by simply seeing something in a square to the other planet. All right, what else have I missed in terms of preparation here today? I thought of something. I asked you, and I'm going to insert my something, and I'll hand it back to you. Okay, so what these 8 primary phases represent also is that it will take at least 8 lifetimes for you to work through a specific intention. One, you can count the phases here, specific intention, 8, a minimum of 8. That's why it takes so long on this planet. That's why it takes so long to evolve. And the specific intention that is reflected in the main Pluto paradigm. There are also subsidiary lives that occur within a primary life in which those intentions are worked out indirectly in various ways. So until the intention is fulfilled or realized at a specific gate or aspect, your soul will remain there. And so this, again, is why it can take a long time to evolve through these phases. I mean, if somebody is literally not conforming at all, which, I mean, I've probably only met one person in my lifetime where this is true, because we all conform in order to be safe or to protect ourselves. It's very common. Nobody wants to feel insecure, but if you're not conforming at all, but that very minimum that you can get through all of this, this intention would be 8 primary or 8 lifetimes, and you've got to be really boogieing to get that done, right?
Right.
Okay, Deva, what have I missed? Because we're repeating ourselves a little bit from other shows, but trying to tell it in a little bit of a different
yeah, set
light
the context and make sure that everyone's, up to speed and so on. So yeah, one thing that we can also talk about here is stressful and non-stressful aspects.
Yeah, perfect.
When you're looking at the blue areas on the image, you're going to see the non-stressful aspects. So those are going to be trines, biseptiles, semisextiles. And when you look at the when you look at the stressful aspects, those are going to be in red. So you're going to look at conjunctions, semisquares, squares, sesquiquadrates, the inconjunct, the opposition. And the difference between the stressful and non-stressful aspects is that stressful aspects tend to put an amount of stress, or they tend to induce a level of creative tension, sometimes crisis. The square is the creative tension and the inconjunction is the crisis, in order to induce the necessary awareness of what that evolutionary gate is about. And I think many people can feel that those stressful aspects are negative, but they're not. You can really use the stress that those aspects give. They are challenging, but the word stress, it implies the necessary tension to keep that soul moving, so to speak, or to induce a level of uh, growth and awareness over the long run in terms of what the evolutionary intention is about. So I'm bringing that up to kind of get away from this notion of non-stressful aspects as being always positive and stressful aspects as being negative. Non-stressful aspects do tend to promote integration and ease of transition. There's an underlying awareness of what the soul needs to do in order to facilitate or cooperate with the evolutionary intentions. However, through transit or progression, non-stressful aspects can become stressful and vice versa. So it's really working, I would say, with the opportunities with each given aspect within each given phase. For example, with the trine, you are going to have to apply, or you are going to have to put into motion, so to speak, the knowledge that you have. Because just because you have the knowledge doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing it, right?
Exactly.
So it's really about using each of these aspects to their maximum, or trying to receive the benefits from each aspect that you see, whether they're stressful or non-stressful.
Mhm. We definitely need to be a little bit outside of our comfort zone in order to grow. Like,
Yes, exactly.
it makes sense. Like if you think about anybody who's setting a goal for themselves, and they're ambitious in nature, you're striving for something, and you don't have it yet. It's that goal, that vision of what it is that you want, that stretch, that reach, that motivates you. So it's best to
Mhm.
have a little bit of both, for sure, to help balance it out. Nobody wants all red, and
No.
I think I think all blue would be a bore. So
Yeah.
white, who knows? White, you're really taking a time out, maybe, huh? Anyway, yeah. So the other important thing is that it's important. We've got to understand what the phase means, the
Right.
actual phase itself, and then you can plug in the aspect. Of course, you're going to find your aspect when you're looking for the planetary pair, that in whatever planets you're trying to look at for today, Jupiter, Mercury. You're going to find that aspect, because that's what we do. We want to know where it is. But really look first to see what phase is it dropping into.
Yeah.
Because the aspect only has its meaning relative to the phase that it exists within. Again, like the trine in a disseminating phase is going to be different than the trine in the first quarter phase. So understand the phase first, and we're going to educate you, talk to you about it, disseminating phase today. All right, that was great. Thank you for that, Deva. We can jump in now to talk about some of the disseminating phase, and then get specific with Jupiter and Mercury. So I know for myself that this particular phase, I've had a lot of experience with just going from, or being in a corporate America world, there is this element of social obligation here. I think about anybody who's been in college, right, or had to get a degree in order to be respected in some way, or in order to get this job or that job. And, you know, definitely I would say the soul at this phase is tired from the battle, evolutionarily speaking, and they are learning to establish purpose on society's terms, right? So there's
Mm-hmm.
this element of social obligation and having to go through the, is it the ropes? Is that the right expression? To, you know, having to follow whatever, that, for example, the curriculum in the college is asking you, or
Right.
taking a job, you have to go through the hoop jumps that they're asking you. I mean, it's just all about accepting it on their terms in order to eventually do it in your way.
Right, exactly. It's after that full phase where there was that potential opposition at the first part, and that tension between the individual's will and the will of others. We're now entering the disseminating phase, where it's like you say, the soul is able to accept that in order for the evolutionary purpose to be established, it must be done so on society's terms. So what do I need to do in order to bring this out into society? Do I need to go to school? Do I need to learn the way that the other people are teaching? Do I need to discover, or do I need to comply with the rules of any given system or organization or community? So it's really learning, as you're saying, it's really learning how to integrate the evolutionary intent within society based on learning the rules, the norms, the customs. For some, it can be learning the social norms at large. If I feel, for example, that I have a capacity to teach or to be a psychologist or in whatever field, I then need to learn what are the ropes, or what does society need from me in order to do that.
Right, and just like, you know, you go and get a PhD after your name, and once you have that degree and the client comes in, you can, and maybe the degree is with it being a traditional therapist, but you get to work within your own
Parameters or context, you
parameters,
can then,
yeah, what
yeah.
to influence that client. You know, you can, if you're an individuated soul, you can really work to move the consensus forward in that context. So you can work with your natural knowing of things, which is very Sagittarian, very Scorpio Sagittarius, that disseminating phase. And but yeah, it is, you know, getting the degree, and then once the door closes, a whole new world, you know, may be happening in there. So it can be very empowering on that level.
Right, exactly. I think so many times it's really easy to lose sight of the long-term goal, where it can become easy to be uh, to sink into a state of just kind of listlessness, or not really seeing that you can. The long-term goal is to make it your own. When you can see that, it can give you that motivation, it can give you that extra energy, it can help you through times that are very challenging. I mean, it's no small thing to go through the system. I mean, it requires a lot at certain junctures. So to keep your eye on the long-term goal, or to know that there is a purpose for doing this, that just because I'm integrating into society on their terms doesn't mean that this needs to be done in their way. In the long run, I can do with this degree, credential, etc., whatever I want. Or I can make this my own, might be a better way to say that.
Right.
So that can give you the extra energy when it becomes, kind of that feeling of, I don't, I know I need to do this, but my soul also knows that I'm individuating, and I really don't want to conform to these norms, or I really don't want to apply this or practice this in the way I'm being taught. I'm doing this for the long term, to be able to individuate through it.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So,
one thing that I remember, it's like that quote, if you can't beat them, join them, you know,
yes.
because you can't beat them when you're trying, when society has certain rules or expectations, and you just have to kind of buckle down and keep your mouth shut until you please, whatever the system is asking of you. And it kind of reminds me of this story I've shared a long time ago. I remember when I was in corporate America working for a division of Johnson & Johnson, and I was in the operating room a lot because I was selling things to the surgeons that they needed. I was a salesperson, and I was, dressing up in scrubs and like doing the whole, and just watching a lot of the surgeries to see if anyone had questions about whatever I was selling that they were using. And I remember, because I would cover a lot of teaching hospitals, and so the residents would be in there with the surgeon who was teaching them different procedures. And anytime that resident would do one little thing wrong, this one particular surgeon would wrap them on the back of their knuckle, like with a silver, like it's not the scalpel, the sharp part, but the other side. It's like yanking a dog's chain, and I could just see their faces. So anytime they did something wrong, these residents would be saying, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, yes, sir." It was so stressful. I mean, you just cannot have an ego. Well, you shouldn't be. You've got somebody's body.
Wow.
But I was just like, oh, wow. It would just take quite a personality to be able to stand there and, just that chain yank all day. So that, if you can't beat him, join him. That resident is not going to be able to beat that surgeon. He's just got to get in there and do the work and prove himself. So that can take some. I mean, this disseminating phase connects also to higher education, right? So, whether it's university or a master's or a PhD or you're becoming a doctor, there's just a certain rank that you have to climb, and you do have to be a yes man in some cases, or a yes woman, yes sir, yes ma'am, in order to get there. It's not easy. So, I was also remembering deviating slightly from the medical field to the field of journalism, that American journalist Bill Moyers has a 228-degree disseminating square, which is a crisis in consciousness. And, he knows that he's an individuated soul, and he knows that the existing thought forms reflected in consensus opinion are totally delusional and not based on truth. So when we think about, like, especially today's day, with Jupiter and Mercury, Jupiter has to do with beliefs. And just because somebody believes something doesn't make it true. And so here's a journalism, he feels that we're being kept from the truth through false media, for example, which of course is absolutely occurring today. And there's a quote by him. He says, "The news is not good news these days. I can tell you as a journalist, I know news is never the end of the story." And that's the part that's what he's talking about here, is that there's a truth that's being left out, right? And he comments too that he doesn't even know what to believe anymore. Where do we go from here? And this is that square. There's a real rebellion against the consensus especially if you're in an individuated state. I see him very much as a third stage individuated, moving toward the spiritual even. He was very into Joseph Campbell's work. So there's a real rebellion against the consensus. And again, that's a disseminating. Oh wait, it's not a square, is that? It's a sesqui quadrate, 228 degrees. There's a great deal of stress at that aspect. It's within the red. I was thinking it was a square, and I just corrected myself here. But anyway, some thoughts as we kind of, if we look at Jupiter and Mercury in terms of beliefs, or in terms of the media, in terms of the written word and the news, how that can play out with this aspect. And of course, he's not somebody who wants to be a yes man or follow somebody else's idea of something. He just cares about getting to the truth. So yeah, I just wanted to share that example.
Right.
For disseminating Deva.
That it also can give you the perspective, especially what you were sharing in terms of that shifting into more the liberation, the rebellion from the consensus. You have to understand, or you have to thoroughly integrate the belief system of the consensus in order to be able to disseminate something that's beyond that, or to be able to disseminate something that is more liberated, alternative, that's in that point that comes from rebellion. And so it's almost like the integration, or going through that process of learning the ropes, cooperating, and so on. It gives you the necessary interpretation of things to know your interaction with others, how they're interpreting things, how they're seeing things, to be able to speak to the from the point of view of mainstream. So it can give you, as you were saying, an ability to interpret things in a way to where you can see beyond the mainstream, but also understand the underlying philosophy, belief systems, and communicate from that point of view as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent. So let's look at our first chart, if you're ready.
Yeah.
That's that picture. All right. Go ahead and start this, Deva.
Okay, so the first chart we'll talk about is the chart of Yogananda. He has Jupiter-Mercury disseminating phase almost in a trine. His Jupiter is at 16 degrees of Aries in the 8th house, and his Mercury is at 23 degrees Sag in the 4th house. So in terms of finding his natural voice, or how he's going to express his natural voice, it really came through growth beyond the limitations of the conventional education system. Look at the Jupiter in Aries in the 8th, the Mercury in Sagittarius in the 4th, that he wasn't going to be restricted by the mere academics, that he was going to put into motion something that was able to deepen the connection ultimately to source, to the creator. In his natal chart, he has Pluto conjunct Neptune in the 10th house. So in terms of also expressing a natural voice of authority through teaching young children, Mercury being in the 4th, that it came through exposure to nature. It came through also meditation with Pluto conjunct Neptune. Mercury conjunct Venus and Saturn in the 4th is that higher ideal, or living in communion with the totality of nature in order to expand upon existing education practices. So it embodied a holistic system, which would be Sagittarius, which was new, and was able to become a means to disseminate different methods of education that broke new ground. Jupiter being in Aries, Mercury being in Sag in the 4th, that it was also about connecting to one's emotional truth. It was also about connecting to one's emotional nature through connection to the various techniques that they practiced, not just academic, but again, yoga, meditation, exposure to nature, and so on. So it had the impact too of incorporating the emotional body, or incorporating the well-beingness within the education system as well. And within that he was able to bring something into society, or he was able to disseminate this through a long-term vision. To me, that would be the Sagittarius. And through a commitment, seeing Jupiter being in the 8th house, he was always advocating to expand, or he was always advocating to take new approaches, to depart, or to expand upon what the existing academic system encouraged, and that he was able to, in a sense, prove in order to disseminate that this was a very valuable technique of education, because those who were in his schools were ultimately very well-rounded. That they had received an education that nurtured mind, body, soul, spirit, that they were also then able to pass down to others. So in terms of the disseminating phase and how he was able to integrate himself as an established authority through learning the ropes. He knew what he needed to do. He created his own structured school, the format. I mean, what he also did was, yes, to those who were cautious, or to those who were coming more from the consensus and offered, their own judgments, that he incorporated academics as well. It's just that that wasn't the sole focus, that was one component among many.
Right.
So in terms of learning the ropes, being able to integrate it on society's terms, he did so, and he ultimately broke new ground by being able to put something new into motion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this chart because the moon in Leo forms a grand trine with his Jupiter and his Mercury, all in water houses. So, of course, what he was teaching was very deep content, timeless content.
Yeah.
And, with Mercury being in Sagittarius, his teachings were taken internationally, right? He went from India to the States, ultimately to California. And so much of the teachings were about just all paths lead to one, essentially. Even at SRF at Lake Shrine in Malibu, California, there's a lake, and around the lake are the different religious branches:
Right.
Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, etc. And it's so beautiful. It's like all these different prongs, really, in a wheel, and and everything is shared in this one body of water. Let's hear that water. And so it's about, it's a universal message. It's a natural message, or a natural teaching of truth, and natural laws of creation. Also, you can see here that he did move, of course, from India to the States, and you can see that international move being in the fourth house as well here, forming that trine with his moon in Leo. So one of the other things that he taught was that everybody is hardwired in their brain, their consciousness, to experience the Godhead within. Anybody who has a desire to do this can have it and experience it. And that's that Jupiter and Aries in the 8th house, the will, the desire to know the truth, right? So forming that, disseminating, essentially a trine to Mercury. Mercury rules his Neptune in Gemini, with Pluto in Gemini retrograde in the 10th. And so that Neptune aspect, referring to the eternal, or to the God within, the eternal source that we call God. And so with this disseminating phase being so much about expanding your awareness, your consciousness, your understandings of nature, natural laws, his ability to be able to, for his message to be far-reaching and timeless in nature as well. And so, and again, I love all this fire sits in water houses, so it has
Mm-hmm.
timeless component to it that perfectly reflects his teachings that never grow old. They are eternal in nature as well, and they are very, with that trine to the moon, it's just so emotional. Anytime you can really get into what his messages and autobiography of a yogi, I could read it time and time again, pick it up and never tire of the teachings that are held within that book. So anyway, this was an excellent example. Any last thoughts on him, or are you ready to move to the next?
Oh, I would say too that looking at his natal chart, seeing Pluto on the 10th, and that also the polarity point being in Sag in the 4th house, opposing Venus, that he assumed the role of mother-father, that he was both simultaneously mother-father to the little ones, and that was able to also become a vehicle to express what you were just describing, the emotional quality of the teachings that were imparted. So it was like through interacting with children, there was the integration of both the fourth tense. And look at his picture; he's a very integrated being. He has both the qualities of mother-father within him. So the work with the children also became a vehicle to express both the qualities of mother-father through his work.
Oh, that was a great addition. Perfect addition there. And it's true that when someone is really evolved, they look equally male and female
Yeah.
as he is in balance. All right. We can go to the next. Carl Jung. So we've got here, I had a slight panic when I thought I didn't do the math right, but I think I'm good. I did do the math right. Didn't I? Yeah. It's like a disseminating square between Jupiter and Libra and Mercury in Cancer. And you know a bit about his chart, Dave. I know we've talked about him before on other shows and looking at different aspects in his chart. But clearly, you know, we talk about somebody who's very innovative with the work, somebody who is, you know, changing the way things have been, thinking outside the box. And, you know, certainly he was doing that and left something for people to think about for a good long time. So any thoughts about him that you wanted to jump in with?
Yeah, that for him, from my estimations, he's in the third stage individuated.
Yeah, I believe so.
And that based upon that, looking, I mean, what jumps out at me is looking at this Pluto being in Taurus in the third, South Node being in Libra in the eighth, that he was really able to establish ideas and express ideas that really challenged the conventional ways of thinking. We're looking at the South Node in the eighth in Libra, that he really was able to impart ideas that there is no one truth for everybody. And that natally he has that Jupiter and Libra in the ninth house, squaring that Mercury in Cancer in the sixth house. So there are a couple quotes by him that I feel really indicate this, that I love this quote. It says, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases."
Oh my gosh, that's so good.
And the another quote that I have that I really feel reflects this Jupiter being in the ninth house in Libra, making this square to Mercury in Cancer. He really needed to emotionally feel, or to see the correctness or incorrectness of any technique through the actual experience. That's also the North Node being in Aries. And this is a beautiful quote he has about belief. He says, um, uh, I have a difficult time with belief. For me, a belief doesn't make a thing true or untrue. For me, it's the experience of something that makes something true or untrue. If I experience something as being so, then I know it is true. So I mean, look at that North Node being in Aries, second house, relative to that disseminating square, Mercury or Jupiter being in the ninth and Mercury being in Cancer in the sixth. So a feeling emotionally that belief was not going to satisfy the actual knowledge or the actual knowing of things. That could only come through the experience with others, interacting with others. So I can really see that as shifting, or that indicating the liberation from the mainstream, and really advocating more that the individual approach, or that there's no one way for all.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, he's really on the cusp, I feel, end of third stage individuated.
Mm.
His Venus and Mercury are conjunct, just like Yogananda's, but his are in the balsamic phase, I believe. Carl Jung and I think Yogananda's are new. But that Venus rules the south node. He's got these stationary nodes, right, which makes this really a paramount life, like a tattoo in a sense, a life with tremendous power and purpose. And that Mercury is balsamic to the Venus, which rules the south node. So he's bringing this body of work here, a psychological body
Mm.
of work to help understand the soul, the psyche. And I love that Venus is right next to Mercury, because it's not just about the mind, it's so much about his experience, which really means, how did you feel when you had this experience? It is
Right.
about feeling, it is about emotion.
Right.
So you can even take, this chart with some of these aspects, and looking at his work and looking at Yogananda's work. Of course, they're different in nature, but they're very much about emotion. And how it's not just about the mind, it's about so much more. And going deeper into the psyche, into the soul. And so you can just see the evolution between these two souls, and just how they bring who they are into this world and impact it with their teachings, with what they know. And so I thought that similarity was interesting. And I have a quote too by Jung. He said, it says here, when someone asked him if he believed in God, he replied, I do not believe in God. I know God. God has no choice but to deliver. I am certain Carl Jung, I am certain Carl Jung experienced the knowing. That was my notes there.
Mm.
I love that. I do not believe in God. I know God. God has no choice but to deliver. Like when we ask for something, I mean, we don't always get it right away. Depends on what we're asking for. But when we talk about the ninth house or disseminating phase, we talk about Jupiter and its relationship even to Mercury, but Jupiter in terms of beliefs and truth. And we teach in EA that that the truth does not require belief. And so to know God is to go beyond that belief, to have that experience
Mm-hmm.
he's talking about that he needs in order to know that something is true. If
Mm-hmm.
he feels it's true in his body, look at that Cancer energy, right? It's like when he feels it's true, then it's true. For himself, he knows it's true. And so he knows God within himself. That is very much cusp spiritual state, I would say, for him to make a comment like that. I don't believe in God, I
Right.
know God. So very strong chart here for rebelling against anything that didn't feel true for him.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he really had his own way of doing all of it. The Saturn and Aquarius retrograde and Aquarius rising, it's pretty evident through this chart. Of course, everything we do know about him.
And he's a really great example of somebody who, I mean, the South Node in Libra, eighth house, I mean, was able to go through the ropes, was able to do the conventional, traditional things. I'm sure very compliant on one level in that way. But look at how it turned out. That his body of work had absolutely the impact of revolutionizing the nature of psychology itself. How people interpreted North Node or Jupiter being in the ninth, how they were interpreting uh, their dilemmas or whatever complexes, whatever.
Yeah.
But he was able to really, through doing that, this is to me the essence of what you can accomplish when you're able to go through that. You're able to bring this out in a way that really helps that mainstream evolve, and in a way that helps you liberate, because you're working within the system in order to advance. So that rebellion is used for really good purposes.
What I love too is that we teach in EA that you can only evolve through the emotional body. You cannot evolve through the mind, that there's a
Yeah.
limit that exists there. And here he sits with Mercury and Cancer, conjunct Venus, which rules his south node. Venus also rules his Jupiter, both of those in Cancer. So, even though he's probably looked at as some intellectual giant in some respects, emotion was a big part of his practice. It had to have been, especially with these aspects. And especially when he's talking about how that experience feels for you. So I liked the pinched toe example too, David. That was good. That was good. It's good to know he had a sense of humor with that Jupiter in the ninth house. I'm sure he did. All right, let's get to our last example here. Nicolas Cage. I haven't seen him in a movie in a while. Or maybe I'm missing him in something, but have you?
Oh, no, I haven't seen him in any pictures for a while either.
All right, so I know you're up on all the movies and music, and so I'll let you take this one.
Okay. Yeah, in his natal chart, he has Pluto in the ninth house, retrograde, conjunct Uranus in a closing or balsamic phase, and Mercury is in Capricorn in the first house, conjunct the south node, and Jupiter is in Aries in the third house, so it's making a disseminating square, and Jupiter is also square the nodal axis. So there's a lot going on here in terms of how he's going to be expressing and finding his natural voice. And with Pluto being in the ninth house, conjunct Uranus balsamic, both retrograde or in a closing phase retrograde, that one of the pivotal aspects or core dynamics within this is centering with one's personal truth and filtering out or discerning what truth is for him and what it isn't. So it's eliminating those ingested or belief systems that were taken in that no longer reflect where he's growing or what he feels his natural truth is. And with South Node being in Capricorn in the first conjunct Mercury, there's going to be a strong desire to be self-authentic, to break out of his own conditioning, to break out of his own stereotypical roles. There might have been a security around kind of playing that, well, this is what I fit into, so to speak, or this is how I could definitely kind of fit into the role. Playing a more conventional type or so on. But with Jupiter being in Aries in the third house, making that square to Mercury and also square the nodal axis, and I feel he's in the first stage individuated, that he's in the process of throwing that off, or he's in the process of creating a new cycle, South Node in the first house, by confronting these stereotypes head on. By breaking out of them. And with Aries being in the third house, trying to find experiences that he can express, breaking out of that conditioned role and accessing more of a personal truth. And one quote that I have by him that I feel really captures this is, he says, "You can't make your choices based on what critics think. You have to make your choices based upon what's honest for you." So in terms of also seeing that Capricorn in terms of receiving judgment, and being able to express or being able to become self-authentic, seeing that it's trining that Pluto, also Uranus, that he's finding his natural voice through the process of speaking something different, speaking something that would be more in the avenue of self-authenticity, that would allow him to grow into something that he feels is more reflective of his personal truth, that would allow him also the freedom to say whatever he felt he needed to say. Seeing Mercury in the first, seeing Jupiter in Aries, that would be going without any sort of limitations or going full throttle. If this is what I need to do to get into the character, then that's what I'll do. So it doesn't matter what I need to do.
Oh my gosh, that's a great example. Yeah.
He's known as a method actor, and a method actor does anything that they can to have complete emotional identification with their character, North Node being in Cancer in the seventh. And a few of the roles he plays really indicates that. One of my favorites is The Family Man, where he's given he has a choice to either follow a career, South Node in Capricorn, and to follow the promotion and everything that seems to be real for him in that moment in time, or that would give him that sense of security and self-esteem, or so on. But then he leaves a romance or a relationship that his heart just really can't, he never really leaves that behind. He never forgets her, always feels a sense of remorse, or always wonders what would happen if he would have made a different choice. And then he's given one day. One day he's given to go back and see what it would have been like had he not made that choice, if he would have made a different choice, to really follow what his emotional body was telling him was real, what was really going to bring him that sense of emotional connection and meaning and so on. And it's great the way that he plays the part, because with the ninth house Pluto, he quips humor. He's really able to poke fun at the stereotyping, and he's really able to break into that more emotional part of his being that's unconditioned, and taking care of the kids, being able to attend to their emotional needs, to have just any job that will help them sustain themselves. But it's great. Whatever he needs to do to get into that character, it helps him really throw off that conditioning, to really disseminate a message of what will help you become self-authentic, and what will help you access more of that emotional nature or internal nature, and to disseminate that through these different roles, or through these images where you plug into the more, you're able to go through it with him in terms of that process of throwing it off, of liberation, of really tuning into something that has a higher meaning.
What was your favorite movie of his?
My favorite movie?
Mm-hmm.
My favorite movie is City of Angels.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. Really good in that. So, can you see his role in that film in his chart?
Yeah, because he's the one who's providing emotional relief to the stressed out doctor, who's pretty much defined by her job, by her position, that she goes through a loss and she did everything correct and she can't figure out why her patient died, and it's a huge blow. And there he is providing her with a way to heal the pain, or he's providing her with a way to see it from a different perspective, seeing it from a viewpoint more around being able to turn that experience into something healing, and being able again to promote a sense of emotional relief for her, or being able to show her a different way of thinking about these things. That could be that Mercury in Aries in the third house, relative to the South Node in Capricorn. It wasn't because she failed, or it wasn't because she wasn't doing her job properly. Being able to see it more from that point of view of holistically, Pluto in the ninth house. What are the bigger reasons for it? But not reinforcing that sense of guilt that the South Node in Capricorn could certainly empathize with.
Love it. That's a great example there. Has an excellent film. All right. Well, wonderful addition. Thank you for that. We had a little bit of everything today. What stage of evolution do you think he's at?
Nicolas Cage, I would say like first stage individuated, perhaps transitioning into the second, because he's really in a place of liberation, or he's really somebody who's able to express the Aquarian attributes.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right on that. It feels about right for him. He's a good one. All right. Well, that finishes our show for today, but completes it. And if any of you are interested in going deeper into EA and you would like to get a hold of the original DVDs taught by Deva's father, Jeff Green, the original course that he taught back in the 90s is available on the website, schoolofevolutionaryastrology.com. And there's a message board there if you'd like to post questions and other DVDs from other lectures, or if you're interested in talking more about your planetary pairs, you can email Deva or myself. And it was wonderful connecting today on this topic. We'll be back before too long discussing last quarter phase. Probably in about 6 weeks we'll be back. And thank you for joining us. Until next time, namaste.